As of 2025, SteelSeries has become one of the longest running modern Transformers toy lines. Beginning in 2018, SteelSeries had one singular goal: to create the most green accurate movie figures possible. I've begun collecting SteelSeries figures since 2019, and I was hooked for a while, being fascinated with the line's commitments to stellar paint jobs, fun transformations, and near-accurate vehicle modes. However, as I've begun delving more into other Transformers mediums and finding out what my favorite characters and certain continuities were, I've begun to stray away from the line considerably, and turned my attention to Legacy, as well as the recent Age of the Primes. Despite all this, even as SteelSeries enters its identity crisis phase, it still has a very special place in my heart, and I've built up quite a mighty collection over the years, from as early as 07 Ratchet to TF1 Sentinel Prime. With so many awesome figures, which one represent the line's core values the most, and which ones portray these fundamentals? These are my top 5 favorite and least favorite Transformers SteelSeries figures. But first, some rules. This time, in order to collect my thoughts together and decide which figures made the cut for each list, I played around with every single SteelSeries figure I own, and scored them points out of 10 based on robot modes, transformation, and vehicle modes, with criteria of accuracy, solidity, but most of all, fun factor. Figures must only be from the SteelSeries line only. For example, I have Age of the Prime's G2 Grimlock, which is a redeco of the SteelSeries 86 mold, but I can't count them because I only have that Age of the Prime's version. Only one version of a particular mold per list, e.g. I have Crowbar but not Crankcase because he is inaccurate as hell, but if I own both, I can only include one but not the other. In this case, obviously Crowbar. Extensive retools are the exception, as enough has been changed to provide a different experience. Lastly, though I've tried rating these figures as fairly as possible, do keep in mind this list is still my personal opinion. You may dislike a figure I enjoy and vice versa, and that is perfectly okay. This video's sole purpose is to showcase how I feel overall about my rather expansive SteelSeries collection, so take my silly personal opinions with a pinch of salt. And with that said and done, let's enter the studio and start with the 5th worst figure.
It's garbage day, see?
SteelSeries 60 Scrapper has had quite the turbulent tale as to how he eventually became part of my collection. At first, I simply purchased him at Hamleys in a shopping centre in South Africa, but then I went to Toy Kingdom and found they had one Dark of the Moon Sentinel Prime, who, both at the time and even still now, goes for stupid prices on eBay. I only wanted to buy one figure that day, so I chose to refund my copy of Scrapper, which, for the record, took forever. Fortunately, I don't regret that decision, because Sentinel Prime's transformation scheme is... A few months later, however, I went to Denmark and I popped on over to Fedder VR, and as fate would have it, they had surplus stocks of Scrappers along with Rampages and Blitzwings. Though I decided this was my only opportunity to induct Scrapper back into my collection. I'm thankful that I did, because Scrapper does have a cool looking robot mode, which, despite getting the eyes completely wrong, looks quite accurate to the original CGI model, with a prominent rustic yellow shade with a few silver paints to showcase the mechanical details. Posability though is a very different, worse story. His arms are decently articulated thanks to the double hinges on each arm, even with the odd weaponry he has, but because of the way the legs are engineered, it means he can only move them very slightly backwards, and his legs don't offer much of a way for ankle tilts. This makes him not the most dynamic of figures out there, which just sucks. He looks great standing normally, but any other pose, he just looks stupid. Transformation, meanwhile, is actually clever in certain areas. I especially love how the legs form around the body and combine with the shovel arm to create this neat bucket for the vehicle mode, though the final section of the remaining parts can be a bit fiddly and difficult to navigate. The result, however, is just... come on, what even is this? Yeah, maybe it passes spectacularly as a Cybertronian bulldozer, but it looks nothing like the vehicle mode he has in the movie, and that isn't an excuse when Scavenger is around with his crazy unicycle design and still manages to look like his vehicle mode properly, at least if you only look at the sides. Perhaps the hand mode was prioritized, but it still would have looked just as good, if not better, had the figure's alt mode not been so jagged and unfinished looking. I have a dozen mediocre Studio Series figures, but at least either their alt modes are accurate to how they looked on screen, or I still find them fun to pose and mess with despite their crushing flaws. Scrapper, I do still find a fun figure, and as of now, I have no plans to sell him as he forms a neat little trifecta of Constructicons for the ones I own. But of all the figures that are just okay, Scrapper is just the most disappointing of the bunch. At least he'll go down in history as my preferred Studio Series Scrapper, because I don't want to pay a Voyager price for a deluxe scaled figure who has less posability than an actual modern deluxe. So glad I've decided to skip the SS86 Constructicons. Well, barring Mixmaster, only because at least he's trying to look different from his Combiner Wars version, and he's like my favorite Decepticon ever. Speaking of,
We mix it up a notch!
from the worst Avenger of Fallen Constructicon in my collection to my absolute favorite, we have Studio Series 53 Mixmaster. I remember the day when he was announced back in 2019, I knew I wanted to purchase him pronto, being my favorite Decepticon and whatnot. I stumbled across Toys, and I'm glad I got my pre-order in, as it was something to look forward to after I came back from a school Greece residential trip I was part of. Robot mode, save for the backpack which had his still devastated face, is amazing. He faithfully recaptures his look in the movie, even with some discrepancies like his face not being entirely silver. I've always loved how the drum of the cement mixer becomes his shoulder armor, which is replicated perfectly here, and even with his unique design, you can get him into a range of fantastic poses. His transformation is just pure fun to me, folding his arm upwards to his wide shoulders, figuring out where each tab connects, forming the mixer properly, and he ends up with a stellar Mac Granite cement mixer mode that looks like it came straight from a movie, with screen accurate details like the gorgeous gunmetal grey and silver color scheme, the same feed system that the vehicle generally has, and even the molded Decepticon dog hood ornament that the movie also features. Although I would have loved to see his tertiary turret mode, it's very understandable that it wasn't included, as that would have had required more engineering, and Mixmaster needed to be in skill with his fellow Constructicons while transforming into both his vehicle and Devastator head mode. But unlike Scrapper, the limb form does not compromise his vehicle form whatsoever, and it looks complete and clean overall. Mixmaster is only at the bottom of the favorites list because it is mostly character affinity contributing to my love of the figure, and there are other Studio Series toys which simply stunned me more. But Studio Series 53 Mixmaster was a figure that successfully lived up to my expectations. I don't have all the other Avenger Fallen Constructicons and therefore can't form Devastator, but personally, I don't need to when I have my favorite member of the group, and he's this damn good.
He's tripping cause he got served.
Studio Series 62 Soundwave is one very notorious figure. I found them priced at only £11 in the House of Fraser before they were wiped off the face of the planet, and yeah, £11 sounds about right. The satellite mode is ridiculous and silly. It's less of a satellite mode and more like an A-posing robot doing extreme gymnastics. It lacks the gorgeous metallic finishes that most other Studio Series figures offer, and instead go for very cheap soapy plastic that just feels weird to feel. The eye deco paint is also infuriatingly incorrect, as it can't decide whether the color of the individual eyes are red like they're supposed to, or it's colored around the eyes to create a red visor shape, which is what it looks like if you're standing far away. Everything about this figure screams cheap, with the only thing of high value being the stand it comes with, as it is compatible with multiple other modern figures. Best accessory ever. And yet, even with all that, I kinda like Studio Series 62 Soundwave. Yeah, I admit it's weird. At least favorites list when number 4 is a figure I still enjoy to a degree. The robot mode is easily the most regal Soundwave has ever looked, and despite the legs feeling a bit rickety, he is actually a very solid poser. but the inaccuracies it has just can't be forgiven. He feels more like a mainline movie promotion toy than a high-quality Studio Series Deluxe, and if I had the Dark of the Moon version, I'd know I'd prefer that one immediately in a heartbeat. And come on, Hasbro, you re-release him this year in a free pack and not even bother to improve his paint job? For shame.
Megatron has fallen!
I have quite a few figures from the very first wave of Steel Series, and although some of them could be considered a bit outdated for modern standards, like all of Ratchet's paint tabs going to a saw blade rather than his face, or Grimlock being a leader more so in size rather than engineering, I do still think Wave 1, at least from the ones I have, hit the ground running with Steel Series' commitments to size and screen accuracy, and the Starscream of that wave is no exception. Purchasing him, though, wasn't the greatest of experiences. I bought him at Hamley's, but I wasn't comfortable with how they charged £63 for him. Hamley's has a tendency to mark up prices unnecessarily, probably to pay off their impressive interior presentation. Thankfully, my mum convinced me to refund it, and I purchased another copy online for a much cheaper price of £25. I am aware that near-identical bootlegs of this figure exists, even down to replicating the packaging to a T, but don't worry guys, I have checked. His insignia's got the diamond eyes, so he's legit. Back to Starscream, barring a wing orientation, he is super accurate to the source material, from the gold accents to his face, the yellow cockpit, to the design of his arms. I'm also glad that this figure came with this rocket launcher that he uses during the Sector 7 raid. It has the same distinct shape even with the rockets being positioned at either side. In spite of the character's frequently mocked Dorito body, Starscream is a fantastic poser. With age, the pieces connecting to his chicken legs have become a bit loose, yet the figure has no trouble standing, thanks to no parts to the clean backpack and the landing gear of his vehicle mode acting as heels to support him. His arms are double jointed, which really adds to the figure's articulation and makes him look threatening even with the naturally odd proportions of the guy. All things considered, I was actually surprised to learn that Studio Series Starscream had some shared engineering of the original Dark of the Moon Deluxe class figure, which I've handled before at a friend's house with a Thundercracker redeco. However, I much prefer the Steel Series, as the joints are considerably less tight, which makes transformation feel buttery smooth too as a result of the upscale. And the resulting vehicle mode?
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
It also looks the part for a more fully formed aircraft mode thanks to the robot mode kibble accommodating the shape of a jet, rather than the robot mode body still being visible underneath the jet mode. There are some minor problems like his articulation being reduced by not having his head ball jointed, and certain pieces of kibble not being pinned so they can fall off easily. But Studio Series 6 Starscream is still, to this day, an absolute classic. Even if you get the Revenge of a Fallen redeco with the Cybertronian tattoos, I guarantee you will not be disappointed.
Don't mess with me. I am the law.
So, picture this. It was my birthday, and I received money to spend, and I choose to go to one of my local entertainer stores. I noticed there was a Transformers vs. Worry Bumblebee 2-pack with Studio Series 22 Bumblebee and Studio Series 28 Barricade, a particular deluxe I wanted to get for a very long time. It was even discounted to £32, which is actually a good deal considering it originally retailed for £64, but also in modern day prices, a 2-pack of deluxes would be around 50 quid, so it was good value for money. Or so I thought. The backdrop was awesome, but that's really where the perceived value of the pack began and ended. The clunker Bumblebee was an okay offering, with his strengths being a supremely accurate sculpt and deco, along with a solid vehicle mode, but it suffers from being top heavy, and the transformation was just decent, though the legs are a pain to transform back from vehicle to robot. Barricade, on the other hand? Yeah, there are a few accurate elements, even including the odd jagged collar he has, but his arms are incorrect, and it is cumbersome to pose them. His saw blade accessory is awesome, but it barely plugs into his hands and it falls off easily. For some reason, my figure's waist just wouldn't plug in, meaning he's constantly flopping around like a fish on land when you try to pose him. Then for some reason the legs are super tight and require way more force to get them into a certain position. If you're patient enough, you can get them into a great pose. But it's at the expense of fun, and you might as well just leave them to display for all of eternity. Wait, what's that I hear? You want to transform him? To get it to his famous police car mode? You might as well be tied up in a chair while watching a terrible comedy movie, because it is more enjoyable than partaking in his transformation. Because it is flimsy and clashy, made worse by the fact that some transformation joints and tabs are in the most brittle clear plastic imaginable. So I can't even relax when converting him for fear I would break the figure, and because of the tight knees, it is ridiculously annoying to get them into the correct section to give the back part of the car enough clearance to tab in. I give up. And the worst part of it all, his vehicle mode is incredible. Unlike his robot mode, everything stays together, and it looks straight out of a movie, barring the missing to punish and enslave tamper graph. But for vehicle mode this good, the tolerances shouldn't be this terrible for both transformation and robot mode. I have the last night's Legion class Barricade figure, and even it was more consistent across the board with what it was trying to achieve, even if he looked a bit like a Transformers Prime character. Oh wait. I have hopes that Hasbro improves over this figure when his last night counterpart eventually gets his Studio Series figure, but for the time being, Barricade is an unbearable, finicky disappointment. If you want a good Transformers 2007 Barricade that is fully screen accurate, the Masterpiece version might just be way better.
You stole the prize money from us last time. You will pay for that.
Helicopter Dropkick was the second Studio Series figure I ever bought, and he's a very underrated figure. He has superb posability, a fun transformation, and a wicked vehicle mode. It does almost everything right except for screen accuracy. Granted, there's no way in hell there'll ever be a dropkick that converts to both car and helicopter in deluxe scale, but some of the proportions are way off, and they need to be way more blue than the predominant grey on display. So, learning from the mistakes of the past, a year and 23 figures later in 2019, Age of Extinction Drift came into my life after my first visit to MCM Comic Con. This figure was my very first exposure to a heavy retool, and I was blown away with how much shared engineering there was between him and Dropkick, while still making Drift visually distinct. The robot mode is super gorgeous thanks to the predominant use of black and secondary shades of metallic blue. The head sculpt just feels ripped straight out of the movie, and his sword accessories are spot on. There are enough paint apps here to make the figure as accurate as humanly possible. The proportions have also been altered to give the character his distinct shape, e.g. the blue outline shoulder armor he has, along with the Bugatti hood ornament faux pas on the chest. Because of Drift being retooled with said new chest, it gives Drift more ranges of motion Dropkick only wished he had, being able to get into badass poses befitting that of a sword wielder like Drift. It isn't only just the look of Drift that's distinct from Dropkick. The transformation is also slightly altered, like having the legs configured around the bottom of vehicle mode cockpit, along with having the arms configured differently, and Drift's swords becoming part of the rotor. I also find it more easier and smoother to transform compared to that of Dropkick. Finally, the helicopter mode which he uses used sparingly in the movie is the spitting image of its on-screen appearance. As extra added bonuses, the rotors freely spin unlike Dropkick, and his turbine can also be used as a shield in robot mode too. If I showed Drift and Dropkick's alt modes to someone who isn't a Transformers fan, it would be likely they wouldn't tell they got similar engineering. That is just how masterful this retool is. With however more than meets the eye collection we issued Overload not that long ago, I hope Drift will get that same treatment someday, so that everyone will have an opportunity to have this awesome figure. Drift is my favorite deluxe class Studio Series figure, and I don't see that ever changing for the foreseeable future.
Insignificant buzzing Bumblebee.
So, you know that clunker Bumblebee figure I mentioned earlier? He isn't my only Studio Series Bumblebee in my collection. On my first trip to my local Smith Toy Superstores, I purchased 2 deluxe cast figures, that being Studio Series 75 Jolt and Studio Series 74 Revenge of a Fallen Bumblebee. Now, Jolt is a pretty fun figure all things considered, even if removing his car cable at the hips immediately makes him 10 times more accurate to his fleeting screen time appearance. But Bumblebee, oh Bumblebee, sting me with your atrocity. Even with a better, shinier paintwork and the similar posability, you still wind up the inferior figure of a Hive. Starting with the accessories, as they are the least offensive part of the figure, they are a bit inferior compared to Bee, as Revenge of the Fallen Bee has an unpainted solid black version of his trademark blaster, which should have had more silver paint, and his Sandwich Wiki figurine is, well, I mean, it's fair. It's useful for photography, but that's about it. The robot mode is accurate for the most part, but it does retain Bee's top heaviness and odd legs. But at least Bee gets a neat waist swivel, while my copy of Revenge of the Fallen Bumblebee bizarrely cannot move his waist to the left, and you can only achieve this by moving his waist all the way from the right, which just feels so wrong to do, and it deeply affects the transformation. Oh, right, the transformation. Easily the biggest sin this figure commits, as it's virtually the complete opposite of Bee. The legs are way easier to convert to its vehicle mode configuration compared to bats to Bee, which almost requires you to use force to untap on the legs. Seeing as Revenge of the Fallen Bumblebee is a supposed update to Bee, this is a solid improvement, but the rest of it is worse in every conceivable fashion. It is super clashy, parts constantly fall off, the front of the car is unnecessarily heinous, and it's almost allergic to tapping altogether because of the lack of clearance each component gives. I have transformed this figure numerous times, and I am certain I can never get his vehicle mode to click altogether. In short, I go to hell and back with transforming him, and the figure still doesn't have the decency to at least make me satisfied with a complete alt mode. But as much as I dislike the figure, I feel a bit uncomfortable with the thought of getting rid of it, because it is a visual reminder of an experience I really enjoyed, just picking 2 random figures blindly at a store I don't often go to. That personal relevance is the one and only reason why Revenge of the Fallen Bumblebee isn't my least favorite Studio Series figure. The number 1 figure on my list barely has any shreds of redeeming qualities, and is a figure I truly 100% regret buying. But for now, just like Bumblebee's radio voice in the movies, stay tuned.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save £50 per person.
I am a huge sucker of a Bumblebee Seeker mold. What began as a spontaneous purchase at Ferro Cigar, which for context is basically Denmark's equivalent to Forbidden Planet of the UK, quickly became one of the most fun Voyager scaled figures I ever had the pleasure of handling. All of these figures managed to get into my top 10, and with good reason, since all of them share the same positives, like the superb posability and the addictive transformation, but also unfortunately the same minor nitpicky negatives I have, like the thighs clashing with the tips of the wings while forming into vehicle mode. Nevertheless, with my rule of only including 1 version per mold, I knew I had to only pick 1, with each figure nearly balancing each other out, picking my favorite boils down to simply personal preference. So, mini ranking time. Studio Series 72 Starscream is my least favorite outing, even with its unique head sculpt. It may have paved the way wonderfully for the other redecos to come, but personally I just find his color scheme to be the most boring of the bunch, and he has a severely annoying QC issue where his right wing pops off when you turn it. Studio Series 89 Thundercracker has a stellar metallic blue and gunmetal grey paint job with the tertiary red shades to add the extra flair. But compared to his fellow Seekers, his shoulder joints are regrettably loose. Not to the point where he is floppy, but it just makes handling him less enjoyable. Studio Series 113 Skywarp, on the other hand, has the best QC of all the Seekers, with every joint feeling very secure and tight, and the improved orange painted cockpit was a very necessary change considering how the original soft yellow transparent plastic loses color very quickly, and the alt mode looks resplendent with a purple and the multiple shades of grey. In spite of the tight competition, overall, for me, picking a favorite was not even difficult, as I firmly believe a mold struck gold for the second time with Studio Series 76 Thrust, as he has all the other figures' positive qualities and more. Sure, his joints don't feel as satisfying as Skywarp, but he's still a solid figure. He feels great to handle. One of my favorite colors is green, so I love the mixture between lime and olive here, which flows together super well, with the light grey balancing the look of the figure out and unifying him with his Seeker comrades. Thrust is even retooled to have his trademark cone head. This makes him not only more distinctive, but also accurate to a CG model too. Better yet, head posability can still be achieved by extending his head and grabbing his mask, and despite the longer helmet size, it doesn't affect transformation whatsoever. And said transformation is still a positive Thrust retained to the other Seekers. Every step is just as enjoyable as the last, flipping the body and the legs backwards to the top of the wings, folding the arms to form a part of the turret section, completing the jet's look by following some mechanical details from the legs, and what you get is a very fun jet mode that replicates its design in the Bumblebee movie near perfectly. In conclusion, for a character who doesn't have any role in the Bumblebee movie, Thrust is a figure that looks super expressive while excelling at all the basics. The complete set of Bumblebee Seekers are all generally fantastic and worth picking up, but if I were to just keep one, I'd pick Thrust without a second thought. But before we get into our respective number ones, here are some honorable and dishonorable mentions, which I thought were notable enough to touch upon but just fell shy of entering both lists. Beginning with dishonorable mentions, we have Mohawk, who is my least favorite core class I have in my collection. Still, I'm glad we even got the guy before core class went kaput, and he's definitely fun to pose even if his legs are a bit weird. But his vehicle mode barely looks like the motorcycle he transforms into, even with the licensing issues notwithstanding. He's only not on this list because his opening jaw gimmick is a nice feature, and it's just unfair placing a smaller, cheaper core class figure next to more expensive offerings that don't stick the landing. Coincidentally, with leader class, bigger isn't always better. Steel Series 99 Scourge horribly misrepresents his on-screen appearance, and whoever had the ingenious thought of making the transformation joint clear orange plastic should probably get fired. However, compared to many of the bottom 5, the tolerances on my copy is actually pretty solid. The smokestacks don't flop around and his joints feel nice and secure. That way I can recreate my favorite scene in Rise of the Beasts with ease. How wholesome. Steel Series 90 Galvatron is on paper a good figure. A clean backpack, awesome paintwork, and yet I dislike this figure. He's nowhere near the bottom 5 on the list, but there are just some numerous things that bug me and ruin my enjoyment of a figure, like his ankle tilts being too locked and stiff for me, his transformation I personally find unintuitive, the truck bed configuration being straight up lazy, and a rocket accessory that just might as well not be included. I don't discourage you from picking him up, as he does have his moments, I just personally find him a bit of a letdown. Alright, now honorable mentions. I didn't bother getting any Steel Series figure that released this year, except so far for one, the icon of Iacon, Sentinel Prime. He shines with his metallic silver and gold paint apps, he's fun to flip between different alt modes, and his posability is amazing. However, I do wish he came with his double blade rather than Zeta Prime shield, which he uses for a split second in the movie, and furthermore, considering Sentinel didn't even transform through the film's runtime, there was no excuse making his wings inaccurate. Regardless, he has been the most fun I've had with the Steel Series line for a very, very long time. I have one Japan exclusive figure in my collection, that being Nemesis Prime, as he was a gift from my cousin who's been to Japan about 3 times. Lucky. He is a fantastic alternative to the super well received Steel Series 38 Bumblebee Optimus Prime, but just with an inherently cooler color scheme, and he has easily my favorite semi-truck alt mode in all of Steel Series. Just don't try to Google translate the box. The parts may turn white if deformed or when the parts are attached and removed. Well, I was just transforming him back to robot. Oh, god damn it! Steel Series 86 Hot Rod is very much the antithesis of Barricade, where I really detest the character.
Idiot. You're honestly an idiot.
But despite being a Voyager Price Deluxe scaled figure, Hot Rod makes every penny count, with his superb articulation, bolstered by his myriad of accessories, his shockingly complex but satisfying transformation scheme, and his bonus features of finger posability and a flip-down visor. Now that's what I call value for money. Sadly, this intermission has to end there. It is time to look at what I consider to be my least favorite Studio Series figure in my collection.
I am my own master.
Why did I buy this? Why? Oh wait, I know why. Because I really love Transformers Prime. And I bought Studio Series Gamer Edition 5 Cliffjumper spontaneously at my local Forbidden Planet as a Prime Cliffjumper stand-in. But then came that annoying Legacy vs 4-pack which featured a Cliffjumper that looked way better. The robot mode doesn't even come close to looking like the character he is meant to represent. His head sculpt is serviceable but lacks character, and the legs are wonky due to the botched engineering, and don't allow for an ankle tilt. The sad part is, the robot mode is the least terrible thing about it. The weapon switching gimmick is interesting, even if reattaching his left arm requires a hefty amount of force, and some poses can be still made even with the limitations. But this is a Transformers figure we're dealing with here, and the robot mode is only half the battle. The conversion starts out fine enough, but it quickly devolves into the most frustrating transformation I ever had the misfortune of doing. Parts keep falling off, and everything has to be squished together in order to fit into the alt mode, and my apologies, this is the best I could do it. Keep in mind, I tried following the instructions before, and I was still completely lost. I have no doubt there are fundamentally worse Studio Series figures out there, but Gamer Edition Cliffjumper was a very awful clashy experience of a figure. Not much needs to be said because I just don't have a very interesting story with this figure. Makes sense. He's super misplaced in my personal collection. Revenge of the Fallen Bumblebee was at least a reminder of a fun day out, and 07 Barricade is a character I really like, and at the bare minimum, he had a very well put together vehicle mode. I have no special place in my heart for this figure whatsoever. In conjunction to the fact that his primary purpose of my collection was almost immediately rendered obsolete, Gamer Edition for Cliffjumper is my personal least favorite Studio Series figure of all time. Whew, well, that is my least favorites list done and dusted. Now at last we round off my favorite Studio Series figures list. The figures so far carried out Studio Series aims to the highest degree with accurate decos, solid posability, and truly stellar vehicle modes. But without number 1, I would have never fallen in love with a toy line to begin with and experienced the figures you see before you. This Studio Series figure solidified my interest in Transformers collecting, and it is none other than
Bravo 6, going dark.
I love most Transformers continuities, but admittedly, the very thing that properly cemented me as a fan of Transformers in the first place were the Michael Bay movies. And when I first laid my eyes on Studio Series 8 Blackout, I was in sheer awe. Something about looking at the figure in his box mesmerized me. His head sculpt was well painted in silver, looking like the way he does in the movie. He had that helicopter blade backpack along with his shoulder guards in the screen accurate configuration. He had those weird knee pads that he has in his official design. I was stunned with all those screen accurate details. I then looked at the back of the box, and I saw the taglines. Big screen inspired. Scale. Detail. Backdrop. I caught on to the fact that this new line, which was released for about a year now, was all about taking the Transformers movies and giving the fans the most definitive figures possible at an affordable price. In my guts, I knew that this figure was special, and that this was my singular opportunity to get him. Unfortunately, all of this happened in Hamleys, so you already know that the price was going to be stupidly inflated from 50 to 69 quid. However, a miracle happened. My mum generously paid for half the amount because she too knew how special that figure looked, and I was not disappointed in the slightest. Oh, thanks mum. Despite the design's chunky nature, Blackout poses incredibly well, thanks in no part to the super tight joints, and the accurate militaristic deco portrays a super sinister vibe, perfect for a Decepticon that nearly wiped out an entire military base, I suppose. Additionally, Blackout even comes with good old Scorponok, who is a neat bonus figure with adequate articulation. His inclusion in the overall package also makes perfect sense, considering his role in the movie being deployed by Blackout to hunt down the survivors of a military base, and he can even be stored at the back of the robot mode. Since this figure was a leader class, at first I was taken aback by the fact that he was shorter than the other leader class figures I owned, but then came the transformation. Everything folds out and connects together beautifully to recreate his famous MH-53 Pavlo helicopter mode. Like cement mixers, I am also a huge sucker for helicopters, but the steps taken to get there blew my mind then and still now, as this beefy robot enforcer gradually mass shifts into this long, well-armored military helicopter, and I have no complaints about this old form. None of the robot mode kibble is in sight. They're all hidden super well to give the helicopter mode its own distinct silhouette. And, better yet, Scorponok has his own designated tab inside the helicopter mode, which is such a well thought out storage feature. I'm also the proud owner of a Grindor Redeco, who I acquired many years down the line when he first released. He is a tad bit more expressive thanks to his retooled posable hands, but his vehicle modes does not tap in as well as Blackout's. Plus, let's be real fellas, Grindor's claim to fame is inherently not as badass as Blackout's. Still, the engineering in this mold is simply masterful, and I commend the designers for managing to execute a super accurate robot mode which accommodates an inherently complicated design while managing not to compromise or hamper the transformation and alt mode whatsoever. Steel Series 8 Blackout is a figure whose sheer presence still remains unmatched by other figures I have bought, even once in his leader class price bracket. I have had this figure for 6 years, and he remains not only my favorite Steel Series figure, but my favorite Transformers figure of all time. Blackout defines the gold standard in what I look for in Transformers toys, but most important of all, he's just a joy to play around with even after all these years, and really, I don't need to ask for more. Wow, what an incredible journey it has been. It was fun messing around with all 43 figures in my Transformers Duo Series collection, and summarizing my thoughts down to what I considered to be my personal favorites. We had some lows, we had some highs, but I hope you guys, watching overall, had a good time. But I am aware that the collection I have is but a fraction of a complete line. So, tell me in the comments, what are your favorite and least favorite Duo Series figures? I'm open to any opinions. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next video.